what really drives political success these days?
Yeah.
Is it crafting the perfect campaign narrative? Or is it about actually delivering, tangible results? It's like the age-old debate, right? Style versus substance.
Right.
You shared this podcast discussion with political analyst Intisab Hussain.
Yeah.
And it really got me thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he has some pretty thought-provoking insights that, might make us rethink this whole narrative versus performance thing.
Yeah, Hussein really dives into that whole idea, that whole narrative versus performance framework.
Right.
But he kind of questions if that's even the right way to be looking at things these days, He goes so far as to say that, there isn't even a real narrative in modern politics at all.
Okay, so now that definitely grabbed my attention. So then he uses this comparison, right, between two provinces in Pakistan,
Right.
Punjab and KP.
Yeah.
And he portrays Punjab as being all about launching new projects and really showcasing, those tangible achievements. Whereas KP, on the other hand, isn't really as focused on that, performance aspect.
Right.
But they're still super popular.
Yeah.
So how do we make sense of that?
Well, this is where Hussein's argument gets really interesting.
Okay.
He uses that Punjab KP example to show how, at first glance, it seems like narrative is more important than performance, right?
Right.
It trumps it.
Right.
But then he flips the script. He says what we're calling narrative isn't actually narrative at all.
Wait, hold on. So if it's not about a compelling narrative, then what is going on? This is where I really got hooked.
Yeah, so Hussein kind of drops a bombshell here.
Okay.
He calls it a cult.
Whoa.
And before you go picturing robes and, secret rituals,
Right.
he's talking about a political cult.
Mm.
So his argument is that instead of ideology or policy, modern politics is being driven by this, almost like a blind loyalty to a specific leader.
Interesting.
Almost like a spiritual connection, that goes way beyond any sort of rational debate.
Yeah.
And it's very resistant to any opposing views.
So it's not just that people agree with the leader's stance on the issues. It's like a deeper level.
Yeah, exactly.
Of devotion almost. Hussein uses some pretty vivid examples to illustrate this.
Yeah.
He talks about how you see people showing up at these rallies just fueled by this passionate adoration for the leader,
Right.
Not because they're super deeply invested in specific policies or whatever. That's a pretty striking observation.
Yeah, and I think to really understand how this whole cult dynamic works,
Right.
it helps to look at how Hussein kind of defines it.
Okay.
He highlights three key elements.
Okay.
So first you have this blind loyalty to the leader.
Right.
Then you have this almost spiritual connection that we were just talking about. And then the third element is a complete rejection of any views that would challenge the leader's, position.
So it's less about reasoned arguments and more about unwavering faith.
Right. Exactly.
In the leader. That makes me think about, how we often see these passionate fans of certain musicians.
Oh, yeah.
Or even brands, Do you see any parallels between those sorts of intense loyalties and what Hussein's describing in politics?
Oh, absolutely. The intensity of the emotion.
Yeah.
And that unwavering devotion, it can be very similar. And this actually brings up another interesting point that Hussein makes.
Okay.
About the global decline of ideology-based politics.
Okay.
So, if this cult dynamic is taking over,
right,
is good governance even relevant anymore?
That's a good question. So are we saying that, actual performance doesn't matter as much as it used to?
Well, Hussein believes that, ideally performance should be crucial.
Yeah.
But when emotions and this cult mentality sort of dominate the political landscape, it becomes almost impossible to really judge leaders based on their actual achievements, are they delivering on their promises or not?
Right.
It's hard to even assess that. And that's where this whole idea of a political cult gets really concerning.
Okay.
Hussein argues that it can actually undermine the very foundation of a functioning democracy.
Because it kind of shuts down debate and discussion and stuff.
Exactly. He says, this kind of environment makes genuine dialogue almost impossible. Instead of engaging in reasoned debate and trying to find common ground,
right,
everything just gets simplified down to us versus them, or good versus evil.
Right.
It's all the nuances of these complex issues
get
totally lost in the fervor of loyalty to the leader.
So it sounds like what he's describing is creating these like really stark divisions
Yeah.
where there's just no room for compromise, or
Yeah.
even like understanding different perspectives.
Mhm.
Is that what he means when he says one side ultimately has to win?
That's a key question that Hussein raises.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty unsettling one.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't really offer any like easy solutions,
Right.
but he makes it clear that this kind of this political cult dynamic can lead to some pretty dangerous consequences.
It's definitely making me rethink all this like simplistic narrative versus performance debates.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a whole other layer of like complexity going on here.
I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from Hussein's analysis.
Mm-hmm.
He's urging us to look beyond those surface level arguments
Right.
and recognize these like deeper forces that are actually shaping our political landscape.
So how can we even begin to like address this cult dynamic,
Yeah.
if it's as pervasive as Hussein is suggesting?
Right.
It feels like kind of overwhelming to think about like how to counteract something that's so deeply rooted in emotion and loyalty.
Yeah. It's definitely a complex challenge, but I think awareness is a good first step.
Okay.
By understanding the mechanics of how this whole cult dynamic works,
Yeah.
the blind loyalty, the emotional manipulation,
Right.
the silencing of dissent, we can start to recognize it when we see it.
Right.
And hopefully resist its influence.
So it's about like being more critical of the information that we're consuming and like the motivations behind certain political messages and stuff.
Absolutely. It's about asking ourselves,
Yeah.
am I being swayed by emotion or logic?
Yeah.
Am I even open to hearing perspectives that challenge my own?
Right. Right.
Like those are important questions to ask.
It sounds like a call for more self-awareness and critical thinking.
Mhm.
And not just in politics, but in like all areas of life.
Yeah.
Do you think that's like part of what Hussein is getting at?
I think you're spot on. He's encouraging us to be, more mindful of how these dynamics can play out, not just in the political arena, but in any group or movement where strong emotions and loyalties are kind of at play.
So we've talked about how to like recognize this political cult phenomenon, but what about like solutions?
Yeah.
How do we like move forward in a way that kind of bridges these divides and allows for like genuine dialogue?
Well, that's the $1 million question, and
Yeah.
I don't think there's a simple answer.
Right.
But I think Hussein's analysis really points to the need for like a shift in our approach to political discourse.
Mm-hmm.
We need to find ways to move beyond this whole like us versus them mentality and create space for for more constructive conversations.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty tall order in today's like polarized climate.
It definitely is. But I think it starts with each of us individually.
Yeah.
Are we willing to listen to those we disagree with? Are we willing to to challenge our own assumptions?
Mm-hmm.
Are we willing to engage in like respectful debate, even when it's, uncomfortable?
So like personal accountability and a willingness to engage in like, good faith dialogue are like crucial starting points.
Exactly. And I think it's also important to remember that, this whole cult dynamic really thrives on silencing dissenting voices. So like speaking up, even when it's difficult, is another way to push back against it.
So it sounds like we need to like rediscover the value of civil discourse and, critical thinking if we want to like counteract this whole trend. But like, where do we go from here? How do we actually put these ideas into practice? I feel like we've really uncovered a whole new way of looking at politics, moving beyond those like surface level debates and really grappling with this whole idea of a political cult.
Yeah, I think Hussein's analysis really gives us a framework for understanding why things feel so different in the political landscape these days. It's not just about, red versus blue or left versus right anymore. It's about navigating this new terrain where emotion often trumps reason and loyalty can overshadow, critical thinking.
And that brings us back to you, the listener. Now that we've kind of explored these ideas, what are your thoughts? Do you see examples of this political cult phenomenon in your own life or, in the world around you? I mean, Hussein doesn't offer any simple solutions, but he encourages us to be aware, to engage in self-reflection, and to be willing to have those tough conversations, even when they're uncomfortable. It's almost like he's calling for a collective, like, raising of consciousness.
Right.
We need to be aware of these dynamics, and not just in politics, but in any area where, groupthink and blind loyalty can take hold.
Yeah, and that's where the real work begins. It's about examining our own beliefs, our own behaviors, being willing to question our assumptions, and resisting that urge to just simply follow the crowd.
So it's not just about analyzing the political landscape out there. It's about taking a hard look in the mirror and asking ourselves how we might be contributing to these dynamics, even unintentionally.
Exactly. It's about, fostering that spirit of critical thinking, open-mindedness, both in ourselves and in the communities that we're a part of. Maybe that's the first step toward building a more nuanced and constructive political dialogue.
This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about. We explored this fascinating concept of a political cult, how it operates, the challenges it poses to open dialogue and critical thinking. We even touched upon how these dynamics can show up in other areas of life. The big question now is, like, how do we move forward? How do we foster a political climate that values reasoned debate and genuine engagement with different perspectives?
Yeah, there are no easy answers. But perhaps the first step is simply being aware of these dynamics, as we've been discussing today. Hopefully, this deep dive has equipped you with the tools to recognize and navigate these complex forces that are shaping the world around us. And as always, we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas and engage in thoughtful conversations with those around you. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep the dialogue alive.
That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, keep diving deep.